Good evening and welcome to this edition of Presidential Media Chat this year. Within 2012, Mr. President graciously made himself available on two previous editions of Media Chat. First in January, then in June, and this third edition this evening, November 19, 2012. After receiving an overwhelming pan-Nigerian mandate from 22.4 million Nigerians in April 2011 presidential elections, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Armed Forces, really does not need any introduction. All we will say is, welcome, sir, to this edition of Presidential Media Chat.
Thank you.
My name is Muhammad Kudu Abubakar with the NTA. My colleagues are, from my right, Ikedi Isiguzo, Chairman, Editorial Board of Vanguard Newspapers.
Good evening, viewers.
From our far left is Martins Oloja, Editor, The Guardian.
Good evening, viewers.
And last but not the least, Bemi Olujobi, Editor, Saturday Mirror.
Good evening, viewers.
Those are the panel that will ask Mr. President questions on broad issues that are on top of the day. I will ask the first question, Mr. President. What is on ground now is the series of constitutional review process, first by the House of Representatives and very recently by the Senate. The House of Representatives coined its own People's Public Sessions, while the Senate called its own public hearings across the geopolitical zones. And in these, one issue seems to stick out, the need for a referendum. What are your comments on this?
Thank you, and let me use this unique opportunity to also welcome you, and indeed welcome all Nigerians that are keyed into this program. It gives me the opportunity to have a dialogue, a chat with Nigerians, and as the heads of the government, it will help us reassess the areas we are doing well. There are some great areas that help us to appreciate and change our method. But most importantly, it gives me the opportunity to personally explain things to Nigerians and listen to them also, because you must listen to your people. Regarding the question you asked about the constitutional amendments, it's a good development, because from 1999 that we started implementing this constitution. The feeling of Nigeria is that this constitution was written by the military. It's not people's constitution. And they are clamoring for Nigerians to write constitution for themselves. But there are key issues, because when a constitution has already been promulgated into law, the constitution itself set guidelines how the constitution could be amended. And anything outside that becomes an issue. So what the National Assembly is doing, going around the country, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, is the ideal thing to do. No matter the name called, whether it is public hearing or not, of course the process of lawmaking, you conduct public hearings. You expose issues to all Nigerians, individual groups, either religious groups, socio-cultural groups, ethnic groups, youth groups, or all other interest groups have the opportunity to make inputs into the constitution. The issue of sovereign national conference, when we mention the word sovereign, people get frightened. But the basic thing I believe as the president who swore an oath to defend the constitution of Nigeria is that whatever we do, we should keep in line with the constitution. Any view that a Nigerian has, he can communicate to the National Assembly, and I believe they will listen to you and integrate it into the amendment. Because if today you jettison the provisions of the Constitution, we will run into another anarchy, and the best option is to keep it with the Constitution.
The issue of referendum, Mr. President.
The referendum, it depends on, the referendum has to do with key issues. I believe what they are doing is to satisfy the issue of a referendum. Because referendum, we want to know the opinion of the people, the thinking of the people on a particular subject matter. And what the National Assembly is doing is they are going from state to state, from constituency to constituency, from zone to zone, to collate the thinking of the people in terms of the provisions of the Constitution, the areas that affect them. So whether you do it in the form of a referendum or not, which of course is the exclusive preserve of the National Assembly, because it's not the executive that amends the Constitution, and I wouldn't want to impose my own ideas on them. I believe that they will follow the law and also listen to Nigerians, but I wouldn't want to dictate the way they handle their responsibilities. No. That is the different arm of government, and they are competent to handle the subject matter that they are dealing with.
Yes, Martin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sir, the Belgorod report is also there. I think the first thing is, when will these go to the legislature? You know, they are discussing their own, and of course, when will that particular report go to the legislature? And following that is the fact that the president himself is the president. The president has his own views. So many matters have arisen from discussions, like state creation, fiscal federalism, and other state police and other matters that have arisen. The president too has his own view. People would like to know the president's views on some of these matters. For instance, state creation is a recurrent issue.
In terms of amendment of Constitution or the process of lawmaking, yes, the president first and foremost is an individual, so he must have personal views. But most importantly, he's the head of the government at the period, so he also has views. But whatever is the interest of the president, the interest of the people matter more than his own personal interest. If you ask about the Belgorod Committee, we felt that there were some areas in the Constitution that were raised during the President Obasanjo's time. I think that was 2005, when they set up the body to look into some of the areas in the Constitution that need to be amended. And different groups were brought to Abuja, the states, religious bodies, ethnic groups, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, they agreed on a number of issues. And of course, there are some issues that they were not conclusive. And we feel that before we go on to amend the Constitution again, we should first of all take the areas that Nigerians have agreed and send it to the National Assembly in form of bills, which already the Attorney General has been handling it. So the Belgorod team is not a team that will just get one big voluminous report and dump it before the National Assembly. No. They are to take those issues one by one and put it in form of bills for the purpose of amending the Constitution. Some have already gone in and are still working on others. But it will also help the National Assembly in terms of the amendment. If you ask about the interest of the president in some of the issues that have been canvassed, I would prefer that I keep quiet for now, allow Nigerians to speak, because the president take the last action in the process of lawmaking. Because when the National Assembly finishes their work, it comes to the president for assent. It would not be proper for me now to begin to impose my ideas on Nigerians. A president makes a statement, it becomes a subject matter for necessary debate. And if I do that, I think I would be over-politicizing the process. So I think the best thing now is for the president to keep quiet, let Nigerians talk, discuss the issues that are dear to them, the amendments they want in the Constitution. When this is collated, yes, of course, it will come to us, not just the president, but myself, the vice president, and members of the executive will also have this say that we believe will be to the best interest of the country. But it's too early for the president to make comments on the issues.
Okay, Mr. President, it might be too early, but during the pre-inauguration lecture, you made some comment that about the tenor. you mentioned the fact that the tenures are the number of years are too few for effective work to be done. And people still think that that's maybe your own idea about some form of amendment to the Constitution, the number of years that a tenure should be. And then the fact, again, once that was mentioned, people started asking whether you had ambitions to still run again. I know at the last chat you were saying it was too early. After some months, people are still asking that question, that are you running again? The fact you are mentioning some number of years for a tenure. And then finally, since the Constitution or any amendments proposed would have got to you at the point of signing, what do you do about issues that you wouldn't have wanted to be in the Constitution?
Maybe I'll start from your conclusion. If a bill, whether the issue of constitutional amendments or any other bill passed by the National Assembly for the absence of the President, and if there are issues I believe, and myself and those who are working with me, the Vice President and the executive arm of government, look into it critically and we believe that there are some provisions that will not be to the best interest of the country, then of course we make suggestions to the National Assembly. We write it back for them to do those adjustments before I will accept that. So that is clear. In terms of what you asked, because definitely there was a time I made a statement after a single tenure. But see, in most cases, when a statement is made and people drag it to different angles, they start to get confused. As a vice president then, when we came in, the lead president set up the Justice Wells Committee to look into reforms in the political structure. Because we're not too comfortable on how elections are conducted and the structures of the party. In nation, especially when you are just growing democratically, it needs to practice what is best globally, the global best practice. And Justice Wells was set up that committee. And Mr. President then said that all the political parties, because we are the practitioners in terms of the political environment, to come together and come up with one position that is better that way. And he asked me, the Vice President then, to chair. And we worked with other political parties. And one of the recommendations we agreed was that there is too much of tension about second tenure. And you will agree with me that there used to be so much of tension about second tenure. And we believe, maybe wrongly or rightly, but we believe that probably if you avoid this second tenure syndrome, you will reduce one sort of conflict in the polity. A governor wins his election. The governor will be allowed to do his work because everybody knows that he will agree. But when the issue of a second tenure is involved, people who want to take over from day one will start fighting. And as a developing country, the tension has been so much. And we believe in that committee, not just Jonathan's ideas, that probably a single tenure may have solve that problem. Well, in attempting to solve one problem, probably you may be creating another one. The argument is that, if a governor or a president know that is have only a single tenure, immediately wins his election, he could do anything. But I always say that even if it is double tenure, if he wins the second tenure, it will mean that those 4 years he will just be wasting the resources of the state or the nation. But it's neither here nor there. But I made that statement about that single tenure just to solve that problem of the overheating of the politics. But I believe from the reaction so far, I think Nigerians feel that the best thing to do is to maintain the double tenure, but rather make sure that we sanitize the electoral process. And of course, you can agree with me that that's one area we have done very well. We have sanitized the electoral process. And our Nigerian elections are now globally accepted as free and fair, and we are now models that other countries are emulating. The chairman of Nigerian INEC has been invited all over the world. So we believe that, yes, if we're able to sanitize the electoral process, the two tenures is okay. No matter, though the tension is there, but then at least the electoral process. So we are doing that. But we are amending the constitution. Probably at the end of the day, they may continue with the double tenure, they may continue with single tenure. But let me keep that to myself now until the Nigerians decide.
Yes, the oil dispute between Rivers and Bayelsa State is a matter of great interest in Nigeria today. And a major point of interest is the fact that you are obviously Bayelsan. How neutral could you possibly be in this matter?
One thing you have to know, as the president of this country, I swore an oath to treat all Nigerians equally. And Rivers State and Bayelsa State, yes, I'm Bayelsan by birth, but all my life I lived in Rivers State. I have more friends in Rivers State than I even have in Bayelsa State. So this is a state that I will not create problems between the two states. So the idea of saying the president will be neutral or not, it didn't come up. Because definitely the president can't even influence. And I made it very clear. Sometimes people try to misinform the Nigerian public. And sometimes we are not very fair to institutions of government in this country. The issue of boundary, it has to do with boundary. The area where you are talking about the dispute is a boundary between Rivers State and Bayelsa State. An area owned by the Calabaris of Rivers State and the Nimbes of Bayelsa State. The Nimbes of Bayelsa State call that area Oluwestri. The Calabaris call it Soku, and there is overlapping boundary between the Soku area of Rivers State and the Oluwestri area of Bayelsa State. As a deputy governor of Bayelsa State, know where to demarcate the boundaries. Then when Gabriel Toby was also the deputy governor of Rivers State, but because of certain issues, we couldn't conclude that matter. But even when before Bayelsa State was created, these two groups, Nimbes and Calabari, fought over the boundary of this area. So it's a very, very sensitive area. But we will demarcate it professionally. I've already directed the relevant agencies of government, that is the Office of the National Boundary Commission, headed by Director General, the Office of the Surveyor General of the Federation, and of course, if oil wells are involved, then also the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission will be involved, the Directorate of Petroleum Resources is involved, and in most cases, the Navy used to be involved too, especially when coastal areas are involved. I've already directed all the relevant agencies to go and do the work professionally. There are procedures to do. At the state level, it's headed by the two deputy governors. When they finish the work, they go to the field, they take their bearings, they will come and present their report before the vice president. It's not even the president for the report. It's at the level of the vice president. If there is disagreement, before the two governors will come to. And frankly speaking, the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission have been trying. You remember that is a body that even took the federal government to court. It's an independent body. They took the federal government to court over the NIRTP project. That is the National Integrated Power Project. That the federal government was spending money that does not belong only to the federal government because it was from the excess crude. So if a body that can take the federal government to court and frustrate that project for almost 3 years, and somebody wakes up and says, Mr. President will influence it. We are not being fair to some of the institutions in this country. Some of the institutions in this country are doing very well, and people should appreciate that. Maybe just to answer your question straight, Mr. President will not influence anything to favor Bayelsa State or any other state.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like us to come back again to areas of politics. The executive-legislature relations appear not really too cozy, particularly when we refer to the House of Representatives. The relations appear frosty. Why do you think this is so, given the fact that the PDP is still majority in even the parliament and the executive is being controlled by the PDP?
I don't think the relationship is frosty. Yes, there may be some disagreement on principle in some cases, but it is not as bad as political. You know that all over the world there are always problems between parliament and the executive. Even from the democracies that we are copied, it's not as easy. You remember the Obama Sahel bill? He has to go to court. There is nowhere in the world where there will be no issue of disagreement between the parliaments. Even in parliamentary system where the prime minister is permanently a member of parliament, they disagree. That is the essence of representation, because people may come there with different ideas, and the parliament is made up of so many people. At the executive level, it's easier to handle things in a presidential system because the president appoints all the ministers. The president can decide to dissolve his cabinet any day he wants. I can decide to drop a minister any day he feels that minister is not good enough. So the president has a reasonable control over his cabinet. But at the parliamentary level, even if you're the speaker or you're the senate president, you're just one among equals. They are all elected by the people. So you always get that tension. Definitely the executive may see things differently. Parliament may see this differently. But that doesn't mean that we are boxing ourselves. No.
Related to that is the issue of budget 2013. We have 4.92 trillion naira budget, particularly the issue of oil benchmark. The House of Representatives is insisting on $80. The Senate is saying 78, and the executive is proposing 75.
Yes, the executive proposing that 75 is based on really econometrics calculation. You see, the benchmark for oil and even other commodities is not just a simple arithmetic, or you begin to think that, oh, maybe oil will sell at $100 per barrel all over the year, so you put your benchmark at 95. The benchmark is a key instrument used to manage the economy of nations. Today, let's assume that even if we know that oil price will go above 110, assuming to go, and even if there's a way of knowing that will go above 110, and you raise your benchmark to some level, immediately the rating agencies will downgrade the economy and you give a negative outlook. But it shows that you are not planning to save. And so in most cases people think that the benchmark is just because of the oil sales. Yes, the oil sales is a factor. Even that is we have challenges because, of course, you know, for example, that America buy our oil, and this is our biggest market is the U.S. The economies in the Europe, they are either recession or can see some kind of stagnation. Globally, the economy is not growing. Americans, I say, let them look inward to see how they can satisfy themselves in terms of their energy needs. So probably they will reduce. They have already reduced, and they may reduce further the importation of oil from Nigeria and other countries. So you see that even though the price is still okay, we are not too sure across. So you must also be mindful because the prices could drop. But besides the fact that the prices drop, the benchmark you take for your crude oil or any other commodities that country depends on communicate something to the world that whether you are managing your economy properly, you are thinking about tomorrow. It's only in Nigeria that people say you should spend all the money you earn. And immediately you start to do that, people know that your economy will crash with time. And coming, and that will make them give you negative outlook. And when they give you negative outlook, people who will want to come to your country and invest will keep away. So it affects the economy in so many areas. So when the executive comes up, it's not just the Minister of Finance, Minister of Petroleum, Central Bank, Minister of Planning. And they also consult the Manufacturers Association, the Banking Committee and so on to come up with this benchmark. So it is professionally done. And it is the best interest of the country.
Yeah, how far has the executive gone in trying to explain this to the legislature?
So we've been explaining and we'll continue to explain.
Mohammed Kudabaka, please permit me to return to I'm a politics reporter.
Okay.
Mr. President, are you not worried about recent development within the ruling party, where the ruling party has not been performing well in recent elections? It began from Imo State. The president, the vice president, and all the party chieftains went there to campaign. They didn't win. In Edo State, they didn't win. Recently in Ondo State, the party was there, everybody was there, they campaigned, but they didn't win. Are you not worried? And another one, before we maybe end politics, is if the legislature in this current amendment process, if the process results in a situation where they allow a second term for the people, for the president, governors, or anything, will Mr. President run for a second term?
The first question as to whether the ruling party is doing well or not, PDP is doing wonderfully well. You see, any country where you have presidential system and you practice true democracy, you don't expect the ruling party to win all the states. And it's even dangerous for this country if PDP, for example, should control all the states. Then there is no longer democracy. And that is even the challenges we have in conducting PDP primaries. Because in some states we look at the primaries as election before the election. So immediately you secure the PDP ticket, you're already a governor. It's not the best interest of this country. And the states you make reference to, the PDP work very hard. I think the PDP got second position in all those elections, and some of them the difference was quite narrow. And for one thing, we contested against, except for Imo State, in terms of Edo State and Ondo State that you mentioned, we contested against incumbent governors who have some strength because they had the privilege of probably, for a governor, a sitting governor, just like a sitting president, every day is a campaign because the activities markets you. So every day the governor has the opportunity of talking to one group of people or the other. But still PDP did very well. For Ondo State, well, if you look at the whole scenario around Ondo State, Mimiko himself was the PDP man. Before he left, when Mimiko contested the first time, his running mate was the state chairman of PDP. So you really see that it was more like a PDP family that divided into two. So I didn't see that as a major challenge to PDP. It's all for PDP to go back in that state and put the house in order. I believe the next election, the PDP family will come together and PDP will take over on those states. Will win naturally when they will put the house in order. They are all PDP members. Let's say that you have been a political reporter, but not a politician. But go and find out. It's all about, it's PDP. Both Mimiko's followers and they are all PDP members. So we'll put our house in order and Ondo State will be better off. He asked me whether I will contest election or not. No, I played with journalists that it's too early to ask a sitting president whether he will contest election or not. And this is one of the reasons we advocated for this single tenure issue. Because if the president tells you today that I'm contesting, it will generate a lot of issues. I'm not contesting, it generates a lot of issues. If I say I'm not contesting, some of my cabinet ministers may be resign and go. Because everybody will ask, yes, of course, most of them are qualified, if not all of them qualified to contest the position. So we leave this. We have 4 years tenure, which is quite short. If you look at the African scenario, that's the list. Africa varied from 4 years to 7. Nigeria 4 years, I don't know. Most of the countries have 5 years, like South Africa, some 6 years, some 7 years, double tenure. 4 is the least. And we are afraid that because we copied from the United States of America. 4 years is a very short time for a person to make an impact. So immediately you start talking about elections. You're unnecessarily hitting the politics. Give us time. Before you ask me whether Mr. President will contest or not, wait until 2014. Give me some time to make sure that myself and my cabinet work. I don't want to distract members of my government.
I'm trying to return us to the economy and a matter that is very close to my chest. The issue of oil subsidy removal. There is some bites coming from you, Your Excellency, especially because only last Thursday you were making the case for the total removal of oil subsidy. Another 1st of January is just around the corner. Nigeria set for Another shocking New Year gift from you?
Thank you, Gbemi. You said that's quite close to your chest. Yes. I hope you were not part of the Lagos State demonstrators. But frankly speaking, I think I was totally misunderstood in the statement I made. I received NIPS students, National Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies. They submitted their report. And normally it's a research work. And they did the analysis. And they said that in Canada, they have 16 refineries. In Nigeria, we have only 4 refineries. So when I was responding, I said, look, if you are comparing Nigeria with any other country, you have to make sure that you explain everything clearly so that people will know what you're talking about. What made Canada to have 16 refineries and only 4 in Nigeria? And I told them that immediately you made that statement, I sent a note to my chief economic advisor to tell me the ownership structure of the 16 refineries they have in Canada. And of course, the chief economic advisor sent a note back to me immediately that the 6 refineries in Canada are privately owned, but they are managed under regulations by the public sector, called the most like DPR law guidelines in Nigeria. And so I said that, look, if you think that Nigeria will get to that level of Canada, then you have to deregulate. I did not say we are deregulating. Already we have provisions in the 2013 budget for subsidy. So if we want to remove subsidy from January, as you are afraid that probably another January is coming, we couldn't have made provisions. But we have made provisions from January to December. But all what I say that if we are to get to that level of Canada that the students are making reference to, then the policy that exists in Canada, which is completely private sector driven, and when we adopt that in Nigeria, then we expect to raise it. But if you don't adopt that in Nigeria, it's difficult for you to raise it. That is the statement. So please, yes, just caress a little.
Mr. President, maybe still back to subsidy and so on. Almost all over the country, the fuel queues are back. We don't know why they are back. We have told subsidies still there, the fuel queues are back. And year in, year out, there are announcements of licenses being given up for refineries. Please, we want to know what is going on with those licenses to private people, why they are not working, and why the queues keep coming back.
In fact, I was supposed to ask you that question. Why people have been given licenses? Refining petroleum products is a big business. Licenses are being given to people, but they are not building. Why? I should ask you because you are a journalist, you investigate. Licenses have been given to people years back, not just the Jonathan administration. I'm not giving license to anybody. But licenses have been given to a number of people, but still they cannot build refineries. Just like we talked about the Canada issue. For you to attract the private sector to come and build refineries, you cannot depend on this issue of government paying you, subsidizing what you produce. Most banks will not give you facilities to come and give that kind of refinery. You see? But so if for those who have that for those who have the licenses to come and build refineries, then of course we must review the issue of subsidy. Because people are afraid to invest where what you get will depend on whether government has money to pay you or not. It's a risk. That's why most people have not built a refinery. But basically, when you talk about the fuel queues, you've been in Nigeria now, you was over the period from military time to date. At any time, there are some changes in policy or certain issues or express fuel queues in our filling stations. Before the probe that was initiated by the House of Reps, and of course the EFCC also looking into the issues raised, and of course at the executive level, Ikimokode committee was also set up to look into detailed reports. And we are now cross-checking clearly as to whether some people are using the process or not. They are talking about forensic audits of payment. So definitely you have created some issues in the system, and people are being careful. So that situation can manifest in different areas. Some people now will become extremely careful. Some people may have the product, but may decide to, they are businessmen, may decide to manipulate the system so that they get more money. But I appeal with Nigerians to bear with us. Yes, I think I got the report from the I Committee last week, Friday, advanced copy of the report. So we'll look into it. And the payment is being done. There's argument that some of the marketers felt that it's the government that is owing them. Some of the preliminary reports we had indicated as if they are owing government, and experts have been brought in to do forensic audits to know, and all the differences will be sorted out. So under that kind of a situation, you expect some. But if you see that the human factor is also there, because as we are talking today, there is no fuel queue in Benin Republic, and all the fuel is from Nigeria. Meanwhile, there is fuel queue in Lagos. So the human element is there, because ours is quite a big country, and we have our own challenges. But I believe by the time we conclude this process of sanitizing the oil sector, we'll keep this issue of fuel queue will be put behind us maybe for good. But we'll play with Nigerians to bear. But we do our best to make sure that the queues don't...
President, sir, if one issue was close to the heart of my sister, this one is close to the heart of so many Nigerians. And it is the electricity power sector. The electricity sector, which we normally call power sector. It begins with the sale of successor companies. This PHC, Power Holding Company of Nigeria's successor companies. One issue arising, I think, which the Guardian wrote an editorial on, the issue of involvement of these former heads of state in bidding in the process. That is critical, that they are always involved. Because if anything happens to them, if they win, for instance, what will the presidency do to some of those predecessors? That's one. One other issue now that is very critical is we invite investors, foreign investors, to come here. Now Manitoba has come. It's very controversial. Various reports that, Manitoba's contract has been revoked. No, it has not been revoked. Mr. President, what is the status of that contract? Is Manitoba going to work in Nigeria? Is the contract revoked? Is the contract still there? What is happening?
Briefly, these are very straightforward issues. Manitoba contract has not been revoked. There were some issues raised because of misunderstanding. In 2006, when the privatization started, Manitoba and others also bid it. As at that time, it was the Bureau of Public Enterprise that handled the whole transactions. But so there was some confusion, and they placed procurement of Manitoba as a consultant to manage our transmission as just the process of the privatization. But with the law we have now, the due process law, what we call the due process law, it has placed that procurement differently. And because it was being considered as just a process of privatization, they did not follow the law strictly. And every country, must keep it with your law. And so we saw some loopholes that were not properly done, and we feel that, look, government, when you are doing something, it's good to do it properly, so that even if you leave, after 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, nobody will invite you to come and ask questions. Remember, there was a time that they wanted to even invite President Obasanjo to answer some questions. You will remember about power sector, the same power sector. And we feel that we should rectify whatever thing that was not properly done. And in fact, I've given the relevant departments of government up to Tuesday to get things sorted out, so that if it requires my final authorization, I'll get that done before close of work on Tuesday. But let me assure you that we did not cancel the Manitoba contract, and I think another. The other issue you raised was what? The former heads of state. You feel the former heads of state are intimidating Nigerians?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, the former heads of state are men that definitely will have to live. And that he has been a head of state before doesn't mean that you go and sleep. They will do business to survive. But let me assure you that whether the person has been the former head of state or not, it will not affect the process. Because the privatization process that is going on, it's not only Nigerians that are doing it, World Bank and others. So sometimes when you read certain things in the papers, people get little information and paint it different colors and give different interpretation and confuse Nigerians. If you're a company, and not the former heads of state are probably shareholders of some companies. I don't think they have companies 100% owned by them. But no matter what, these companies bid. First of all, when they will assess technically, they will not know whether you're a former head of state or not. If the companies that are qualified technically, they will go into the financial bid. And it's blind, because whatever is selling is covered, and they take a particular day, they get their guidelines and open, and everybody assess. After that, before they go into the financial bid, the same process. So whether the person has been a former head of state or not. Let me give you one example. My vice president is from Kaduna. But do you know that the Kaduna Disco, no company, was fixed at the end of the assessment? If some kind of company come out as the winner, probably say, oh, it's the vice president's interest. It's this person's interest. But that is the vice president's state. But no company, because no company met up the criteria. And so some of these issues raised in the papers, some of them probably people misunderstand the process. Some people may deliberately want to create confusion. Whether you like it or not, we are operating in a political environment. So certain things, and luckily for you, you said that you specialize in discussing us who are politicians. And so you know that politicians play politics with almost everything.
So
don't be afraid of any. If your company is interested, just ask them to go on.
Mr. President, this media chat is as interactive as possible. We are on Twitter at MediaChatNG, and we have numbers on the screen for text messages to be sent to us. There are quite a number of tweets already that we have gotten. If I may just run through them, Mr. President. Ahead Niger is asking this question. He said, Mr. President, between Kogi and Anambra, who legally owns the oil well supplying crude oil to the Orient Refinery in Anambra State? And Granty O is asking, how far has the President gone with provision of jobs promised youths after the partial removal of subsidy on PMLs in January?
Thank you. The issue of the dispute between Kogi, it's not only Kogi and Anambra. Enugu is also interested. In fact, some people used to say that probably oil is always to create problems between communities or states. There were issues. So what I did was to invite the governors of Anambra State, Kogi State, and Enugu State, and say, look, yes, there is oil. Yeah, the oil wells must have a geographical location. Probably the operations of the company may impact other states, other communities that don't even own the well, because that is the oil industry. Not necessarily where the oil well is that matters. The operations of from where you build a flow station and other facilities also matters. And I said that they should stop this media hype. They should not argue. And directed the relevant agencies of government, that is the National Boundary Commission, the Office of the Surveyor General of the Federation, the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission, of course, DPR will join because oil wells, they know about the oil wells. They give you the GPS of the oil wells and so on and so forth. So they will come under the Vice President. So they are working on it. So finally, they will tell us who owns it. For now, Mr. President don't know who owns it because what I know is that the three states are claiming ownership. Full ownership or partial ownership because they are expecting some money. Money always brings problems. But these institutions they are credible institutions. They will do their work professionally, and at the end of the day, they will tell us the states that own the oil well, either the well or the facility where the oil company is, the area where the oil company is located.
The issue of jobs.
The issue of jobs, let me again reassure Nigerians that we are working very hard. We know in terms of economy is growing compared to the global recession. Economy is growing. But the greatest concern of the people is that the statistics we are seeing reflect in my day-to-day living. Is my life standard of living improving? Are we getting jobs? I know you cannot get jobs overnight. When you stabilize the economy, and I always say that the duty of government is to make sure that you come up with programs that will encourage the private sector. And when the private sector starts investing, jobs are created. For now, there are successes. Directly as the government, we also have some programs. We have what we call the community development or community works programs, where we have a projection to employ about 360 youth annually from all the states. That is being worked out as a part of the SURE program. We have the UWIN program, where we encourage entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, to give them grants, not loans. And the first we did was for men and women, over 1,000 benefited. The second was dedicated for women, and over 1,000 will also benefit. So if one entrepreneur could just employ 2 to 3, then you can see the multiplier effect. That is to encourage young people to begin to grow in the business sector. In agric, we have what the agric minister target as Negro. I was even asked what is the Negro. I said that is Nigerian young people to become commercial farmers. You know, the problem in this country is that our farmers are getting old. In any community you go, you don't see young people getting involved in farming because they see farming as a job that requires a lot of labor, as if it is for people who don't go to school and so on. Farming is a big business. In most cases, in some countries, like if you're a farmer, if you go somewhere and say your father is a farmer, then people will begin to respect you because they know that you're coming from a wealthy family. And so that, look, that is what we should have. And we are now commercializing farming and the whole value chain, and we are encouraging young people to go in. That would generate a lot of jobs and other areas that government is intervening. But the most important thing government is doing is also to encourage the growth of the private sector. Within this, from 2012 to date, I think from about 2011, from the statistics we have, about 2011, about 54 companies registered in the Corporate Affairs Commission. And now, after October this year alone, not up to December, as of October this year, 71 companies. So just these 2 months, this difference alone, not quite a year, you have so many companies are registered. Even the number of companies, I cannot tell you an exact figure because I've forgotten the figure told me by the president of MAN, the Manufacturers Association. New companies are registered as members. There's positive trends in everywhere. Positive trends in number of people going to business. Positive trends in the number of people entering the professional body, the Manufacturers Association. Positive trends in the capacity utilization. So it shows that the private sector is expanding. And the areas that, in fact, you know that the area of the textile is one area that gives jobs to so many Nigerians, especially in the north. And it almost collapsed because of power. But now, because the power is stabilizing, the textile industry is coming up. The footwear industry is coming up, and the textile industry and the footwear industry alone is employing so many people, so many now. So this trend will continue as we continue to stabilize power, as we continue to intervene on our road network, as we continue to work on our railways to make sure that the cost of doing business is reduced, the cost of transportation, the cost of energy is reduced. The companies will begin to employ more. So on the overall, a number of things that is being done is increasing the opportunities for more job creation. I believe before the end of 2013, you will see that the issue of unemployment will still be there because we're a country of 76 million people. It's quite a high number. So there's no way you create jobs overnight for everybody. But clearly, there's positive trend everywhere.
Another tweet from Ken Henshaw is saying, do you honestly think that your government is doing all it can to combat corruption, given the low number of trials and convictions since you were elected?
Well, the person who asked that question probably has done. Yes, probably has gone to do the survey. What he can from the start, maybe if we talk about conviction, maybe it's based on the EFCC or ICPC. You can go and do some research work. What ICPC has been doing from the inception to date, what EFCC has been doing from inception to date. But I can assure Nigeria and the global community that this government is fighting corruption frontally. And the results are obvious. It's just that sometimes people confuse Nigerians. The first and the greatest problem we have in Nigeria was the issue of political corruption. And I say that, and I believe in that, and most Nigerians, and I believe you also believe in that, that if Mr. President should manipulate himself into office without the vote of Nigerians, or the governor can just manipulate himself into office without the vote of the people, or a chairman of the council can just wake up and manipulate himself into office without the vote of the people, he will do everything. So the first and foremost is to sanitize the electoral process. We take things for granted. Sometimes I've been in politics at least from 1999 to date, or 98 to date, and I know that we've gone very far to sanitize that sector. And manipulating elections has to do with a lot of corruption. For you to sanitize the electoral process means that you have dealt with corruption in that area significantly. Otherwise, you can't survive it. And people don't even talk about it. We had free and fair elections in Ondo State. We had free and fair elections in Edo State. We could also talk about Anambra. I'm talking about non-PDP states. Because the PDP state, they face PDP. For you to conduct those elections and for the world to accept that they are free and fair, you must have dealt with the corruption associated with the electoral process to get to where you are. Look at one sector in agriculture. Before this time, I've been one of the privileged Nigerians to be a deputy governor from 1999 till date, in position to know what happens about fertilizer business and tractor business. It is the mammoth means of stealing, looting, and corruption. The so-called fertilizer subsidy that government pays in, fertilizer never gets to the farmers. Just about 11% of the fertilizer gets to the farmers, and even that 11%, sometimes the fertilizer of a very poor quality. This government has sanitized that to the extent that the orders are coming to learn. In fact, Bill Gates Foundation is so pleased that they are helping us, and they want to fund the process in other African countries. And some countries are sending their ministers of agriculture to come and learn from our minister of agriculture what they call the electronic wallet system that is used to distribute fertilizer. The fertilizer manufacturers are happy because they are doing business. They are no longer pursuing one minister or the other. They are no longer coming to Villa to look for whether they will buy their fertilizer or not. That is another area that probably because it was an area that deals with farmers. It is not unlike other very sensitive areas where so many of the big boys are involved. So people don't even talk about it. We have sanitized that process. Look at the oil industry. And of course, you know as a journalist that the extractive industry all over the world, be it crude oil mining, be it diamond mining, be it gold mining, be it tin mining, all over the world, the extractive industry is always associated with one crop factory or the other. So, and look at what has happened within this period. The number of probes, House of Reps, started their probe. When they get their report to me, I send the whole report because that report came from the National Assembly. So government will not set up a white paper to look into it. If it is a committee we set up, then normally at the end of the day, the cabinet will set up a team to look at it because it came from the National Assembly. I send the report, the whole report to the EFCC. And I told them that they should not limit themselves to only the recommendation, that they should go use that, they should go all in. And even before that report, the Ministry of Petroleum set up committees to look into it. We never started even sanitizing the process even before the National Assembly issue. That's one thing people didn't know. Even when Aganga was the first, when I became acting president, when I dissolved the cabinet, the President Minister of Trade and Investment was Minister of Finance. I told Aganga that, look, Nigerians are not too comfortable with the oil industry. Get professional bodies, globally accepted, to audit the oil sector. That was when Aganga was the finance minister. So they must do a comprehensive audit. Let us really know what is happening. So we looked at it. That Aganga team worked on it before the current Minister of Petroleum also set up another thing. Even before the House of Reps came up with their Farouk report. And of course, after that, the Mukude team. So there's never a time that the oil industry has been so attacked from all angles. Because a number of Nigerians feel that a lot of wrong things have been done. But at the end of the day, of course, the revenue, the last three committees were Ribado shared the one on the issue of revenue leakages in the oil sector, also set up by the petroleum ministry. So there's never a time where the source of corruption has been shut down. See, one thing about even the deregulation, we said that, look, if you keep money on the table where there are so many people and the money is disappearing, why not put the money in a safe so that nobody will open? If you don't come up with policies that will make it difficult for people to have access to the money that belongs to the people, of course there will be the tendency for people to take the money. And even the concept of deregulation will also help to sanitize that, create jobs and so on and so forth. But I believe that the effort this government has put in terms of fighting corruption, I don't think any other person has done that. Well, you see, the perception, I always say that the perception is different from real. And I remember, I'm not saying we don't have corruption issues at a different way. Definitely we have. I find it very difficult to go to any nation and say there is no element of corruption, but it is how you make sure that you don't expose the people to practice whatever they have interest to do so. So that is key, and we've done very well in various fronts in terms of fighting corruption. But the perception, if today somebody is driving on the road and gets an accident, and if you ask the average Nigerian, you say, oh, because of corruption. Because of corruption, and that's why probably there's a gallop somewhere, and that is why somebody had an accident. They will just believe that everything is caused by corruption. And some of the retreats we conducted, and we outlined the causes of certain things, including corruption and others. In most cases, when the people vote, you'll be surprised that corruption will get less than 20%. But in terms of perception, we believe that corruption is the cause of all our problems. Corruption is there. We are fighting. We'll continue to fight corruption. No doubt about that. But this government has tried to investigate the corruption associated with elections. Mammoth was sanitizing. Corruption associated with fertilizer procurement was enormous. It's sanitizing. We are now dealing with the petroleum sector. and we'll go and we'll fairly satisfy this country.
Mr. President, there's the issue of high cost of government. And we see each budget here, the recurrent expenditure is so much that even when people talk in terms of the budget performance, maybe what we are just doing is seeing figures for payment of salaries and maintaining offices. Since from the beginning, the capital expenditure is already low. So we're asking, how are you going to possibly see that cost of government goes down? Because I was reading in one place promises you made during the election. There's a summary in 91 election promises of President Jonathan Goodluck Jonathan. And I don't think it's possible for you to remember all of them. But if you're able to reduce poverty, if you have to reduce poverty, which is one of the promises, it then means that government must have enough money to invest in sectors that will help to reduce poverty. But if government spends so much money running government, how will it then reduce poverty, which is central to this summarized 91 election promises?
That person must have got me wrong. I have never promised to reduce poverty. I promised to create wealth. If you reduce poverty, the person is still poor. You're only reducing the poverty. I don't believe in that concept of poverty reduction. It's mainly associated with maybe poverty. You talk about wealth creation. It's very more positive and so. So when you ask me, say that you promise to create wealth, how far have you gone? I don't want to talk about poverty reduction. That is my principle. But if you talk about the cost of running government, you see that within this period, and it's quite unfortunate, and these are the realities, because luckily I'm talking to the journalists, because you are key actors. No matter what people talk, you will have to express it in platforms, the media, either electronic, print, whatever. So you are key actors. We increase salaries by up to 54%. And when you increase salaries by up to 54%, where are you getting the money from? It's from your capital vote. The earning of the country is almost relatively stagnant. Yes, we improve a little, depending on circumstances. So budget, some say you begin to add a little. But the budget, in terms of the total projected income of the country, 2010, 2011, 2012, the difference is not so much. But then you increase salary up to 54%. Where are you expecting the money to come from? Surely it will come from your capital budget. So, but we are trying. From 2010 to 2012 and projected into 2013, the capital budget, we are moving it from 22.4% or so to 30-something%. So a significant improvement. Well, the recurrent is dropping from about 76% down to maybe 60-something now or so. So we are trying to adjust. But when you now suddenly increase the recurrent, automatically you decrease capital. So it takes time for you to begin to adjust the budget. And that is why we are adjusting differently. When you talk about cost of running government, sometimes people think that, the number of aides of presidents or aides of this. What is the salary of aides? We have so many parastatals, over 400 parastatals. Some of them are no longer relevant. Some of them, 3 parastatals doing the same thing. And that's why we set up the Orosanya committee. There are some establishments, some professional bodies are also in government budget. And government is giving money for personnel costs, overheads, and even capital. And for that, professional bodies must take care of themselves. So most of those areas we are trying to, those are the recommendations of the Orosanya body. And we said that these are Nigerians. The S offices have employed people. Even though the recommendation is that we are going to merge them or scrap them, we are reducing the capital there, we are reducing their overhead, but their personnel you must pay their salaries until you find a place for them. So we are adjusting that. Just because I'm traveling out, we have this D8 meeting in Pakistan, so I'm traveling out Tuesday night. Otherwise, this coming week, or today is Sunday, so this week would have taken the Orosanya report, because the team that looked at the white people, they are finished. So I believe the upper week, if I don't, just at the upper week to have this IIC meeting in London. So these are the problems. So The report has been there, but because of my movement, we've not been able to take it. But definitely we will conclude with that report before the end of this year. But even if we conclude with that report, it will not decrease it automatically. Yes, it will, because there are some of the issues that we can handle administratively. But some of these bodies were established by acts of parliament, either military decrees, which automatically become acts of parliament. So if a body is established by law, for you to merge or for you to scrap, you have to send it back to the National Assembly, because that is their statutory responsibility to repeal. At best, we can reduce the votes we give them. We can just give them money for salaries and probably reduce their overhead and probably no major capital apart from maybe buying furniture and so on and so forth. We can reduce, but we cannot scrap it up until the National Assembly repeals. So, but gradually. So we're on track. And it is improving. If by 2013 we are moved from 22.4 or so from 2010, and we're getting to 30-something 2013, 2014 to 2015 to begin to go up gradually. Because we adjust. But that is the issue. And that is why when people come to argue for salary, that sometimes the journalists also support. Yes, salary increase is okay. But for any one kobo that you increase in salary, that kobo will be removed from capital. It's a kind of a dynamic, it's a balance. You don't get the money from the moon. It must come from somewhere.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to return to the issue of corruption and your comment on perception management. Perception management, either in marketing or in public relations, is a critical issue. And one of the reasons is that despite all the measures you outlined, Nigeria is still rated as second most corrupt country in the world by Gallup poll and even Transparency International and other bodies. And this is one of the reasons they always give, even by the analysts in the country, that on the Halliburton case, nobody is even in detention. On Siemens deal, nobody. Even some of these committees set up by the oil-related, some of the committees on oil-related issues, some of the issues that have been taken to court, there is no diligent prosecution. On 2 occasions, the Attorney General was not even present in court, as reported in the media. These are some of the issues. The issue of enforcement of the law and even rule. And I think it will be important to know what the President is going to do at the moment to fast-track the issue of enforcement, shaming and punishment for those people that are involved. And that is one issue. The second one is the one on the civil servants, on waste that is usually associated with corruption. The succession administration dealt with monetization policy, for instance. And then monetization policy, if you look at what is going on now, is gradually returning. Take, for instance, the National Assembly people, the presiding officers. It was gazetted by Federal Executive Council decision that some of their houses should not be sold. It was reported that the Senate President, the Speaker, and their deputies bought their own houses, and they asked that another be built for them, and it was budgeted for. And it is even been rumored that they are rejecting the one that has been budgeted for. Mr. President, what are you doing to stop this trend?
Thank you. You spoke on a number of issues that if you take them one after the other, probably that alone will take the remaining time of my conversation with Nigerians. But the key thing there is about the monetization policy of government. Monetization policy is good, but the implementation has a lot of challenges. And I remember when the monetization policy came up, I think it was 2001 or so, or 2002, quite early in this present dispensation, when I was the deputy governor of Bayelsa State. And the member from Bayelsa State in the Revenue Commission, one Chief Frank Akubi, came to brief us about the new monetization policy that the federal government initiated. And of course, if it is only the federal government, then it wouldn't have been compulsory for the states to key in. But the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission was involved. And that was the same time they talked about salaries of political office holders, allowances, building, and so on and so forth, where people begin to complain, why should the salary of a councillor be more than that of a vice chancellor, and so on and so forth, because it came as the same package. So he came to brief us, and the governor was traveled out that week or so, so I even received him. And immediately he finished explaining, I told him that, look, yes, it's a good policy, but I think you will have problems implementing it. And I told him that for Bayelsa State now, it will be extremely difficult for you to even implement it. Because Bayelsa State was a very rural state, just to cover. We don't even have houses where commissioners will stay. And we just managed to build estate for commissioners. And you're telling me that I should sell those houses. Then when those commissioners go, people will buy. Then you appoint another commissioner. Where will they live? They go and stay in the waterfront houses in temporary, what they call basher houses. And it will not work. As I look at it, you say that a public officer should not be given official car. A director that's supposed to supervise road projects. A director is supposed to move from Zamfara to Enugu to Ibadan, to Ilorin, to Yenagua. And you say that director should go and buy his own car. The money you make provision for cannot buy a new car. That means that director will take bank facilities to support whatever you put there to buy the car. You expect that director to use that car and run around this country to supervise the road. Who maintains the car? Okay, you say, okay, you make provision for project vehicles. At what point will the director be using the project vehicles to do the inspection of projects, and at what time he will use it to go to work and so on? So it's very complex. So I wouldn't want to go into the National Assembly because, like, the raise issues of Mr. President and National Assembly, they are always disagreeing. I wouldn't want to go there. You can engage the National Assembly to discuss those issues. I wouldn't want to, so that I would not be misunderstood. But basically, the privatization, monetization policy was good, but has challenges in implementation. I'll say that. The prosecution, when you mention about Aliboti, you mention about cement. You are a journalist. What is the history of Aliboti? What is the history of cement? These are things that didn't come up now. So if you look at what is being done, even in the Aliboti case, because they are not new things, it's easier for a sitting government to deal with issues that come up. But when an issue has been dealt with by a previous administration, and you want to deal with it, you must also follow a particular procedure. It may be slow, but it's better to be slow and you do the right thing than to move it too fast and do the wrong thing. And of course, you know the laws we operate based on the British law. I'm not a lawyer, but they say that it's better for 9 criminals to get away on punishment than for one innocent person to be punished. So it makes the process slow. And that's why sometimes we take different options. But you know the history of Aliboti, you know the history of cement.
So, Mr. President, let's go back to some of these tweets. Ahead Niger tweeted that with all you know now, Mr. President, what are your biggest fears about Nigeria's future and what excites
some part of this country? These are the key security challenges we have, which we are also tackling frontally. We never knew that Nigeria was going to get to this level. So our security infrastructure was not designed or built for that. And now we are building capacity on front. And we are going to get it under control. I've earlier told you that our economic outlook is positive. The area of agriculture is becoming a model. We are revolutionizing it. If you look at what happened in the flooding, if it's a country that has no hope, this flood would have created a lot of impact. Though, yes, people were affected. But Nigerians also appreciate, you're a journalist, you know more than me. What government did within this period. I don't have plans. People are afraid maybe there will be food scarcity. There will be no food scarcity. In fact, we'll even produce more food. Because the Minister of Agri told you that I released 9.7 billion to intervene. The idea is to get high-yielding varieties of what our farmers have been using. Some will go to directly to those who have been impacted, but we're not limiting to them alone. We're giving to all Nigerians, even those who are in areas where the flood never reached. We are replacing their planting seeds free for them. So probably somebody has been cultivating 1 hectare of land and they are producing probably 10 bags of rice. Now the same hectare may give you 20, 30 bags. So on the overall, we produce more food. So we are moving as a nation. I have no doubt about that. This is a period where 3 rating agencies, 2 invited by the Minister of Finance, 1 did it on their own, and all of them rated us and gave us positive outlook, BB minus positive. And because of certain steps we are taking, at least in terms of our foreign reserves, we have gone up to $43.3 billion. It's moving. Excess crude account also is quite okay. It's just about 9 billion or so. Then of course we start with the sovereign wealth fund, which was never there before. Started with $1 billion, and that's one thing that all the economic wizards globally are commending the country now. And we want to also build up on that. So the outlook is very, very positive, and we are committed. No matter yes, there must be comments because we are working hard, but so many people are still looking for jobs. But the jobs will come. The economy is positive. The foreign direct investment within this period is quite impressive. So Nigerians should be very, very hopeful. We don't sleep, because we are committed. And before we get to 29th of May 2015, Nigerians will know that Jonathan and his team meant well for this country.
A text we received from 0703-250-3080 is saying, what is Mr. President doing about the poor state of Nigerian roads and expressways? Doesn't government have enough funds to maintain them properly?
The road sector is one of the key sectors. Of course, unfortunately, the flood even worsened the case in some parts of the country. We have our challenges, but with the SURE program, we're having a little more funds, and we're intervening on the roads. The problem of the country is that over the period, the country is vast with so many federal roads. So probably because of the budgeting pattern, we spread money thinly across. Instead of limiting yourself to few, quickly, maybe 1 or 2 years, intervene and finish with this and go to that and so on, so that Nigeria will see clearly. Every year we know we spend money thinly, and we are focusing on how we invest on the roads. And watch out as the floods are going down. We are working very hard, and God willing, the situation on the highways will not be the same again.
Well, Mr. President, I think we will go to issues of security. What can you tell us on the Boko Haram's reported conditional disposition to dialogue? How far with the dialogue, and what are the options?
Presently, the government is not dialoguing with any group. There's no dialogue between the Boko Haram and government. Though there was a news item talking about dialogue, but the Boko Haram is still operating undercover. No. They wear masks. There's no face, so you don't have anybody to discuss with. So you can't even discuss any condition, because there must be people that will claim or will come and have that ownership that they are discussing with government on behalf of the Boko Haram. But so far, nobody. So what you read in the papers is just what we read, but there's no dialogue that is going on anywhere.
Yes, Nancy, permission to ask one more question about the cost of government. Your emergence as the president of Nigeria runs totally against the grain. Given your modest background, you have told Nigerians the story of your life over and over again, and the story that inspires us. And Nigerians love you for this story. They think you are a man raised by God from among us ordinary people, a real man to keep things real in Aso Rock. But on your watch, Aso Rock is voting 300 million to buy dinner sets, 1.something billion for food, 375 million for refreshments. Really, Your Excellency, Nigerians are thinking there's a disconnect between these figures and the man that they perceive you to be, the man that they trust, the real man that they trust will keep things real in this place. Are these figures real, Your Excellency?
In fact, maybe one of these days you will interview the permanent secretary in the State House to brief you on some of these figures. Those who know me and those who come around and eat with me, I even eat 2 times a day in terms of food. I take breakfast and dinner. And the food I eat is not an expensive food, so you can ask anybody. Well, see, there is a lot of misconception about the State House or villa or the presidency. In fact, I told the vice president, either the vice president or the chief of staff, so that probably in 2014 budget, there are quite a number of parastatals that are built into the State House that I've asked the finance minister to pull them out. We must have a way to replace them. A number of parastatals are placed under the State House. And sometimes people say, how will the State House spend this money? Because the thinking of the average Nigerian is that the State House is the president and the wife and children, and the vice president and the wife and children. That is the thinking of the ordinary Nigerian. When they say State House, their thinking is, it's president, the wife and children, vice president, wife and children. The National Boundary Commission is under State House. The Border Community Development Agency under State House. So there are quite a number of parastatals that I feel that should be pulled out. Then the issue of cutlery sets. If you are privileged to visit countries like Ethiopia, and they expose you to a dinner, then you will say that, I don't know what, I have not checked, that those figures are not things that you swallow. Dinner set to serve whenever you are hosting presidents of the world. And not what, it's not what I use. Most of those, if I don't need them, it's not what I use. As a country, no matter what you think, Nigeria is a nation that has respect. And there is a minimum you can go in terms of managing situations. There is a minimum you can go. So, either you contract most of these things out. In that case, you don't even need this cutlery we are talking about. Those are not cutleries for the day-to-day use, used by vice president or president. No. The cutlery we are making reference to, because I don't know the total cost. I can't say exactly, because I didn't expect that to be an issue. And when you talk about feeding in the State House, whatever you call, Nigeria hosts a number of programs. Somehow we have not hosted AU, but we host several ECOWAS meetings. We host business of state. And so, maybe I will ask you, what do you mean by OD?
You said you should have applied the OD solution.
So what do you understand by the OD solution?
He's saying the head of state is quoting and saying you should have applied more force.
Maximum force.
Yeah.
One thing, luckily, it talks about OD. And of course, when the OD matter came up, I was the deputy governor of Bayelsa State. And there's no time, but I can give you the narrative of what led to even the Odi crisis. The peak of the activities of the militancy was when 12 police officers were killed, cold-blooded murder. Of course, that made the federal government now to invade Odi and attack Odi. And I'm telling you as a deputy governor, because after that invasion, myself and the governor entered Odi. Ordinarily, the governor and the deputy supposed not to move together under a situation that is not so secured. And we enter houses, we saw some dead people and so on. Most of the people that died were old men and old women and children. None of those militants was killed. None was killed. So, if bombarding Odi was to solve the problem, then it's never solved. And of course, if the attack on Odi had solved the problem of militancy in the Niger Delta, then the Yar'Adua government, which I also have the privilege of being his vice, wouldn't have come up with the amnesty program. You know. So that should tell you that the attack on Odi never solved the militancy problem. People will even tell you that rather calculated, because it attracted international sympathy. And a number of people begin to see something differently. And we had more challenges after that attack on Odi as a state.
So let's get back to the tweets again. We have Chukwuemeka Ikoro here. He is saying, Mr. President, any president that fixes Benin or a road and power will be the best president ever. Will you?
Then Jonathan will be the best president. So just wait. Because I will fix the Benin or a road. My government, the team is here, the vice president is there. Work minister is there, the finance, petrol, all of them are looking at it. We will fix that road. And of course, for power, it's one area that at least Nigerians appreciate that we are moving. At least we are yet to get 24 hours of light in all our cities. But you will agree with me that the difference is clear. It has improved significantly and will continue to improve. By this time, maybe some of the cities would have been getting 24 hours of light, and probably big guys like you would have been buying fueling generators again. The only problem we have is that our transmission infrastructure is weak. We have a number of projects that are going on, and we believe before the first quarter of next year, we'll have completed quite a number of infrastructure projects. We moved from 2007 about approximately 2.8 megawatt to a little below 3,000 megawatt production average. But now we are generating more than 5,000. But because of the weakness of our transmission infrastructure, we cannot evacuate power. And we have seen the reasonable stability. So before the middle of next year, when most of this transmission infrastructure would have been completed, power will stabilize generally. And this dry season, we are going to intervene on that road from Lagos down. Lagos, Ibadan, and of course, I know it will come.
From AA, what is the situation with the Lagos-Ibadan expressway that has been concessioned to Bicotney?
Bicotney. That is the problem, and that is also the history. Bicotney, I road has been with the Bicotney for since we came on board from 2007 or so. And I think we are going to take the final decision. The matter was from all what it looks like the company will not be in position to do. And I don't think as a responsible government we can continue to allow Nigerians to suffer. That is the busiest road in this country. It's beyond Southwest, because that is the busiest road in this country. And all of us in government, we feel pained that the country is held ransom because of a transaction that probably was not consummated properly. There are some kind of issues. But we cannot continue that way. We will intervene on that road.
Mr. President, to tell you how interactive this media chat is, there is a tweet related to what you just said. Suleiman Arzika is saying, if Mr. President does not believe in monetization, why does he not repeal the policy?
I said that the policy on paper theoretically is good. Theoretically is good, but we have implementation challenges. Let me give an example. When you repeal a policy, there are some cases where you will repeal. But when you repeal a policy, there is a way people feel that policy somersault is also another way that we are not too comfortable. Since the policy is good theoretically, what do we do to make sure that practically it can only work? Let me give you the issue of housing tariffs using Bayelsa, for example. Even here, because I remember as a deputy governor, then I told the man who came to before that, look, I'm the deputy governor of Bayelsa State. At least in terms of going to school, I've also gone to school to some reasonable level. In terms of exposure, as at that time that I was a deputy governor, so a president can appoint me as a minister. But if he appoints me as a minister, where will I stay in Abuja? So that time, I think year 2000 or so. So I don't have a house in Abuja. Where do you expect me to stay? Where is the money that I have to go and hire? They have visiting a minister of the Federal Republic and so on. So that wouldn't have been a problem if we're in the UK, where you have the mortgage system. Because in Nigeria, the mortgage system is not working. And that is one of the areas, if you follow up in our last retreat on housing, is to develop a strong and viable mortgage system. So if today, if somebody has been a headmaster of a school in my village and probably has no house in Abuja, and you appoint the look at this thing that we must do to make sure that the policy will be implemented in a way that people will not abuse it.
President, we appear to be running out of time, but before we allow you to round off this media chat, let me read this tweet, sir. Umunakwe Henry is saying, Mr. President, you are an icon I look up to. Nigeria is a complex country to handle. Please carry on with your transparent politics. On that note, Mr. President, you may want to round off this media chat by telling Nigerians your message.
I have to thank you again for this opportunity given to me to have this conversation with Nigerians. And I assure Nigerians that we'll be doing this conversation probably quarterly, because the idea is not for Mr. President to come and defend actions or inactions of government, but the idea is to have a conversation and cross-fertilization of ideas so that people will have the opportunity to get starting to properly explain to them, and also we in government who are serving you will have the opportunity to listen to areas that are dear to your heart, like Agbemi will say that they are dear to her heart. And for today, I'm thankful to all of you who have participated in this program. But let me reassure you again that our country is moving. The economic indices are okay. The future is quite bright. We have our challenges, definitely, as every other nation, but we are progressing. And before 29th of May, when Jonathan and his team will have concluded their 4 years assignment, Nigerians will definitely have something to remember us. I thank you.
Mr. President, I'm being told that we still have some more time. We may want to go to some other issues, and particularly foreign affairs. Implications of President Obama's victory for Africa and Nigeria, sir.
The President Obama victory is the best thing that has happened to the black man within this period. He's the first black to be elected the president of the most powerful country presently. And if he did not secure a second tenure, the conclusion would have been that the black man is not good enough. And that is why Obama was unable to. That alone makes me happy. Yes, Obama may assist African nations just like the United States government. They have been assisting in terms of our security challenges and quite a number of things. They will do. But the most important thing is for us who are black. It's a clear case that we can do well where the environment is okay. And that is a good motivation for all of us.
Mr. President, I think there's one issue that we must deal with quickly. is this a nexus between quality of education and development. Now, in a recent rating, of 10 top universities in Africa, 8 are in South Africa, 2 in Egypt. And in global context, I find that 10 top universities in the world, 8 are in the United States, it is G1, and 2 or 3 most of the time in the United Kingdom. That's how you find their development. What are you doing when our own premier university, which used to be number 4 in the Commonwealth, the University of Ibadan specifically, is now number 30 in Africa? What are you doing to restore the lost glory of education? Because with that, we will get development.
Martin, thank you. If you've been following up, you will agree with me that we have taken quite a number of steps in terms of bringing our educational system to what it should be. It's quite unfortunate. Things have really gone down in the country. Let me tell you about the very recent one that we looked at the tertiary education. We set up a committee to go around and look at the 36 universities owned by the federal government and the 36 universities owned by the state government, and they came up with a report. When they presented that report to us in the Federal Executive Council, we felt touched. And I said, well, the university education is on the concurrent list. So the state-owned universities, private-owned universities, federal-owned universities, that I think for the public universities, federal and state, that presentation should be made also to the Governors Forum during the National Economic Council. And it was made to them. The Vice President was also there, the Minister of Education, Finance Minister, Planning Minister, and so on. And at the end, we collectively set up a committee, and we believe and we agree that we cannot play politics with tertiary education, not education generally. So a committee has been set up, and we are going to intervene. And before this time, too, we come up with this policy of looking at our best brains. We are talking about the quality. It's brains that create this hybrid tower model we are talking about. That among the first class, we are coming up with a program to encourage among the first class, the best, to go to the best universities in the world. Just like you said, we were talking about the top 25 universities in the world. And if you look at the distribution of the top 25 universities in the world, there are some very powerful countries that don't even have one. And I was surprised. I wouldn't want to mention names because it's not proper for a president to be mentioning names of countries. But we are committed, I think, collectively, all of us, we must push back our university system and educational system generally to where it should be. Even at the primary and pre-primary level, the number of dropouts quite high in some states. This is totally unacceptable. In some states, over 50%. Though a state like Imo State is almost zero. So you see that, but some states are above 50% dropout. So, and we are looking at all this, and we are taking the critical steps, and we will definitely get back to where we used to be. I can assure you that the system started dropping for a very long time. We didn't just wake up and get to where we are. If you read this report, we didn't just wake up and get to where we are. So to move back through, that's to follow the same course. We will move faster than dropping, I believe. We'll work hard.
Everyone assured me that if I didn't leave Lagos yesterday, I would miss this event. That says a lot about the state of that industry. Sir Richard Branson, a man known all over the world as a business wizard, said that the workings of that industry in Nigeria are simply beyond human comprehension. And the investors who have tried to play in this field have gotten their fingers burnt over and over again. What's the problem with this sector, and what are you doing?
I may ask you, because you are quite interested in that area and as a journalist. And the aviation industry is an industry that is dominated by the private sector all over the world. The most successful airline is BA globally. I believe so. Maybe there are, but everybody knows about BA. Almost every international airport you go, you see BA. BA is a private sector business. So, governments, yes, some government, Ethiopia, for example, they have the airlines. We had Nigerian Airways that crashed, just like the shipping line and others. But basically, it's an industry that is dominated by the private sector. The government provides the facilities, the infrastructure, which you agree with me that we are trying. Maybe before the end of next year, you will see that most of our airports will wear new look. The security infrastructure will be there, so anybody can do business in Nigeria. But sometimes the question you ask, I also ask myself, and I also ask the experts, why is it that we have so many private people who came up with airlines in Nigeria, but after some time it collapsed? We are giving incentives now. We don't take tax from whether you are bringing aircraft for commercial use or bringing the spare parts for repairs. We are giving all the incentives to make sure, but we still have issues. So I think it's an area where we want to have a retreat next year. We want to bring the experts within the country and outside the country to sit down and analyze what is the fundamental problems we have in the aviation sector and what must we do to make sure that we don't get to where we are now. This is quite challenging in terms of movement, but we'll resolve it. If anything the government will do, we'll do it. Central Bank itself made a lot of provisions and soft loans to the sector, but it never worked. So putting money has not even worked. So what is the factor? What is responsible? Is it management issues? What is the key thing? Do some research work. Maybe we'll also invite you when we'll have the retreat, so that we can also share. But we'll have the retreat in January on the aviation sector. But I agree with you, we have challenges.
I just wanted to return to the issue of reports. Because even when we go on this retreat, they produce more reports. We have so many outstanding reports that either white papers are being awaited and so on. And the question is, getting on that, we just set up reports, set up committees, they produce reports, the white papers are not out, the implementation stage is delayed, and even some of the reports from presentation, scandals and controversies come up around them. So what are we going to do about these reports? Because they are critical to moving forward as it is.
I think in most cases people don't understand how government works. So when the government is implementing a report, you may not know that the report is being implemented. You will know when retreats have been held and recommendations, but the implementation is done by various departments of government. So some has to do with budgetary provisions and so on. So when it's been implemented, people don't know. So people talk that reports have not been implemented. No. We are not going to waste time. Most of these retreats, you see that myself and the Vice President with ministers sit there for the whole day. Look at the power sector, for example. We had the retreat on the power sector. As at that time, they said that one of the key problems we had was gas. Everybody said gas. So say, okay, Minister of Petroleum, this has been identified. Minister of Petroleum now came up with a policy for emergency gas supply. Now we have more gas. But people will not know. People always think about the negative. These are the things that interest people. After that retreat, the ministry now said this is an emergency, and they calculate, and now we have more gas than is required for our generating plants now. But don't know. So you know how that affects. Reports have been implemented, but people will not come and publish in the paper, we're implementing this, we're implementing that. I mean, Nigeria expect that. See, the only thing we'll have to assess government is that which are these areas that they are promised they are going to do something. Are they doing? Are we seeing improvement? That is how you know that the report is being implemented. Reports are being implemented. We don't need to announce it. I just have to mention the issue of gas and power, because that's what every Nigerian would know, whether you're living in my village or you're living in Zamfara State. If power is improving, you will notice that power is improving. If it is the road in Yenagua, somebody living in Ibadan may not even go there for 10 years or throughout his lifetime, so he may not know. So we are implementing. It's completely wrong to say that we set up committees and recommendations are made and government don't implement. No, that's not true.
Okay, Mr. President, how is the First Lady?
It's fine. Actually, she was in service. She was in service with us today.
Okay.
What happened is that, see, Nigerians are always looking for negative things. No, not that bad that she was ill. She received treatment. Immediately she came back. She was still recuperating. She couldn't get into very active. But now she's okay. She was in service. I think 2 days back, she really received some youth groups and so on. So she's okay.
We have a last question about the cost of wealth. I'm passionate about the cost of wealth.
It's dear to your heart.
Yes, sir. The International Energy Agency says Nigeria loses $7 billion annually to crude oil theft. Now, if somehow government is able to do something about this huge loss to Nigeria, if we don't lose this money to oil theft, is it not possible that the desire to remove subsidy will be banished forever?
No, they are not the same. Crude oil theft and subsidy are two different things altogether. The stealing of crude oil is not stealing petrol, not PMS or DPK or HSK or so, no. The crude oil that is being stolen from you is still from your pipe and export it to other countries. So, and that's an area that we've been working very hard. If you've been following up my pronouncements and my charges on the security agencies and the relevant departments of government like NASA and others, and they are succeeding now. It is dropping drastically. But that is different. The crude oil stealing is different from the issue of subsidies. They don't go together. Maybe your logic, your argument is that, okay, if they are not stealing, government will make more money. So if government make more money, government can continue to be subsidizing petroleum products. One thing you must know about me is that maybe there's this slang that there's no free lunch in the United States or so. If a country will continue to say you get things freely, we can't move anywhere. We are talking about our universities, for example, that have degenerated to that level. For you to bring this university up to where me and you will want a Nigerian university to be, you need money. We are talking about the aviation. We are talking about rail. So if we spend all the earnings of government to be paying for the consumption of few of us who are elite, who have big cars, then you have no money to intervene in other areas. You cannot develop as a nation. You cannot create the jobs you want to create. Because the infrastructure to support the foreign direct investment will not be there. So even if we stop by, God willing, we'll stop this issue of stealing of our crude oil. And even if we earn a little more money, it will not automatically mean that that money has to be used for our own consumption. But one thing again you have to know is that if they steal your crude oil from a pipe in Bayelsa State, and if our OPEC quota is 2.5 or thereabout million barrels per day, we'll find a way to produce that. We'll still find a way to produce it. So we are losing from our resource. We are wasting the wealth of the future generation. So it's a little more complicated in terms of crude oil theft. It does not really translate into the way you are looking at it.
But, Mr. President, maybe the very last question before we round up is the issue of performance contracts and the fact that there are many acting CEOs spread across now. And the question is, when will the existing vacancies be filled?
Very soon. You know, why we left some of these things, appointment hanging was that, just like you said, my friend, we are all politicians. You know. Martin is a politician like me. You see, every sector of the country says that they are marginalized in appointment, they are marginalized in appointment. So I told Secretary of Government, at least look, hold on. Let us assess and see how we spread it. So the remaining appointments, hold on. let us take an inventory and see whether actually some geopolitical zones are benefiting more than others. But that was it. So we suspended for some time. Unfortunately, it's within a period that quite a number of vacancies came up, but we'll fill them very quickly before the end of the year to make sure that we balance equations. Marginalization is always coming up in the Nigerian political environment. So we'll do that. I've said it all, that I have to thank Nigerians for this interface, for this dialogue, and for these discussions I'm having with them. And they should feel free to continue to make projections, and that we assure them that the country is moving forward. Our economic outlook is positive. Our agricultural revolution is real. It is working. It will continue to work. People are quite pleased. Yes, we have challenges in terms of security, but we are also intervening robustly, and we believe we bring it under control. And Nigerians should not be depressed at all, because if the manufacturer the manufacturer group are saying that yes, in terms of capacity utilization is improving, in terms of number of people registering as human members increasing, in terms of people going to corporate affairs to set up their businesses increasing, in terms of foreign direct investment in the country is increasing, and the economic outlook is stable, then of course you know that the country has what? Our foreign reserve is increasing. Of course, including the $1 billion we have in the sovereign wealth fund. And of course, the excess crude reserves also is increasing, because it shows that you are prudent and you are mindful about what will happen tomorrow. So the country will not just wake up and go into a recession. So we are very, very hopeful. Though we have the challenges, but we are moving in the right direction. This is reflected in our electoral process. Before this time, you know where we are as a nation. Our power sector is improving. Also, our road infrastructure will definitely improve. So let me reassure Nigerians again that Jonathan, the Vice President, and our team, before we leave, will leave something behind that Nigerians will be happy. I thank you.
On that note, sir, we say thank you very much, Mr. Ikedi Siguzo, Chairman, Editorial Board, Vanguard Newspapers. Thank you for coming. Martins Oloja, Editor, The Guardian. Thank you for coming. Bemi Olujobi, Editor, Saturday Mirror. Thank you for coming. On this note, we end this presidential media chat. Until we come here again, I'm Muhammad Kudabaka saying good evening.